Good morning from Hayes Hill in Pine Ridge, Arkansas, and I am doing this little recording as a favor to my sister, who probably was joking, but you get what you ask for. So move over, Paula Dean, and here we come with how to make pie crust from Annette Hayes. I have one already rolled out, and I'm going to try to make this a little shorter by showing you how to put this one in the pie plate. So you make your pie crust, get it rolled out, put it over the rolling pin, and then I like to use a 9.5 or 10-inch pie plate, and you form it in this pie plate so that you have no bubbles around the edge. Bubbles means that it's gonna come up around from the plate while it's baking, and you'll have a big mess in the oven afterwards. So make sure you get it worked out so that there are no bubbles around the edge of it. This is gonna be an apple pie, and it's gonna be a double crust pie. So we're going to trim the edges off and leave them just big enough to wrap the top crust around, and then flute the edges after we've done that. And I like to roll this crust out fairly thin because it does have a crimped edge on it. And though I like crust, you can tell by looking at me all too much, but some people don't like crust that much, so I try to keep the edges as thin as possible. Trim this off, leave it about a 1/2 inch out from the edge of the pie plate, and then we're going to set this pie plate to one side. Looks like the lighting may be a little questionable. We may have to adjust that the next time around. Now, my mom used to roll this leftover crust out and make some really good stuff with sugar and cinnamon sprinkled on it in the oven. For us kids, we love that. I have another batch made here, and I'm going to see if I can touch the screen and get a little more realistic lighting. Okay, I've already measured my ingredients. It's just a standard pie crust. I like to make them one at a time, and I have a food processor, which I used to use exclusively to make pie crust, but my sister-in-law Connie makes hers by hand, and she makes some really good pie crust. So I decided to change my method a little bit, and I only make one pie crust at a time. I don't like to make two because it just works out to make, even for a double crust pie, works out better to make one pie crust at a time. We have 1.5 cups of flour, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 cup of shortening, and then you need ice water that you're going to put in. This needs to be cut in with your pastry blender real well. And we're going to put in about, the recipe calls for 4 to 6 tablespoons of water for a single crust, and I usually put 5. When I was teaching students, I would have them err to the side of getting too much water because it makes the dough easier to work with, but the least water you can put in there, the more flaky your crust is going to be. So, but I'd rather them to have a good experience with the pie crust and not be frustrated because it's going to tear up while they're working with it. So you want to really not short the time on cutting this in. It should be so that your shortening looks about like small peas in the bowl when you cut it in. And so, this takes a little time. There's just no way getting around it. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what I use for the filling. It usually takes 4 to 5 large apples, and I like to cut them in quarters. Of course, core them. I leave the peelings on because I just like the color and the texture of that. Plus, it saves a little time. Gives you a little fiber, so that's always good. Then I turn those quarters sideways and cut the slices as thin as I can get them across the quarters, not lengthwise, because that way I can cram more little apple pieces into the pie shell, so it makes it good when it cooks down. And I I add some cherries or some craisins to my apples. So that, you know, takes part of the bulk of the thing up too. I like to put a little bit of salt in the filling. Anytime there's something sweet, I put just a pinch of salt in there. It seems to bring that out and cut the sweetness a little bit. But it has those apples, then it has the craisins. I like to squeeze the juice of 1 lemon, about a teaspoon of cinnamon, a little bit of nutmeg, the dash of salt that I mentioned, then a cup of sugar, or a little less if you can make it with less. I like to try to use about 3/4 of a cup of sugar, and then about 1/3 of a cup of flour. The recipe doesn't call for quite that much, but I like to make sure it's not too runny, that it's going to set up. Then when I take this water and put in, there's 2, and I'm going to put it around the edge, 3, 4, there's my 5th one. Now that had ice in it, which is just about melted, but it's still ice cold, and it's important that that be cold when you're mixing this up. And touch this screen again and see if I can get the color a little more realistic in the bowl. Since I'm doing this by myself, this is our anniversary, and Bill is gone on a charter bus driving trip, so here I am occupying myself in the kitchen. So I'm by myself recording and making the pie crust. But I like to make pies. They're fun to do. Not a great cook. Bill is the cook. But certain things I like to do, like pies and pizza and cookies, all the stuff that's not good for you. But anyway, this is mixed up, and like I said, we've put in 5 tablespoons of water. Then I take the bowl and mix this around until it forms, just with my hands, until it forms a ball of dough. And so we're actually going to do a tiny bit of kneading out on the counter. This is not bread dough, and you don't want to overwork the gluten in the flour, but it will work better if you do a little bit of kneading. And this is somewhat of a kneading process here in the bowl, just to get all the pieces together. So as you get it into a ball, then once it's in a ball in the bowl, you can put it out on the counter and start kneading there. But if you don't have enough water to get this into a ball in the bowl, I would add a little more water, because it's going to be harder to work with. Like I say, it'll be flaky, but if it tears up, it doesn't matter how flaky it is, it's going to be frustrating to work with the dough. Okay, so here we have our ball of dough, and I'm going to set it on the counter. And I like to put a little flour down on the counter or the board. If I were a real pastry chef, I might use proper terminology. You want to take your rolling pin. This is one my grandmother's cousin made me, and it's pretty cool. Actually, I think he may have been her nephew, but anyway, related on my grandmother's side of the family. Okay, so after we have the ball in the dough in a ball, you want to make sure that the edges of it are smooth, so that when you start rolling it, it's not going to have cracks form. And I like to roll from the middle to the outside, and I like to get my hands up on the rolling pin. I don't use the handles of the rolling pin that much. I roll from the center to the outside, kind of in a circular direction, and that kind of minimizes the number of cracks that you're going to have. Now, this being the top crust, it doesn't need to be as big, but I'm going to roll it out just as much because I want it thin. And usually when I've rolled it out about this much, or maybe just shy of this because it's starting to stick, I'll pick the crust up, put flour underneath it, turn it over, and then roll from the other side to keep it from sticking to the counter. But we want this nice and thin because you don't want your top crust. And when I say thin, you're just going to have to experiment by the feel of it with your hands. But you want to feel around the perimeter and make sure it's not thicker on one side than the other. When we get this rolled out to the right thickness for certain pies, I have templates that I like to use. And with this one being an apple pie, I like to use this little template that has apples. And so you just put it on there. It has fall leaves on the other side, so it's kind of a multi-purpose. And I just use my rolling pin to press that down and cut that out. And then, due to experience, I know that the size, this is another one of my apple pie templates, but I don't like it as well. I do like, however, the fact that the perimeter of it is just right to fit on the inside of my pie crust. And so I put that down, get that centered, and then trim this. In fact, since I'm using this template, I can go ahead and show how to crimp the edges on this pie. Get this up back over here where you can see it. That may make the lighting a little bit better. Okay, so to crimp the edges, you're going to take them and fold them under. In fact, you might be better off kind of folding it under a little bit before you start. Oh, and I have my little classical instrumental music in the background. We have to have the nice ambiance going. You can probably hear that. And so then you just take the pointer finger of your non-preferred hand. I'm right-handed, so you take the thumb and pointer finger of your preferred hand, and then you push the dough into that little place created to make your crimp. And the thinner and smaller you can get this, of course, the thinner the crust will be around the outside edge, so you don't have that big thick crust if people don't like the crust. Now I'm going to put my apple pie filling inside, and then, and since I already have it ready, maybe I can squeeze this out in one attempt and not have to do two videos. So I'm going to just pour this in. Oh, and I do put a little bit of the zest off of the lemon rind in here because I find that makes a real good flavor. And it may look like you have too many apples, but that's why I like to cut them small and crosswise, because that allows me to work them down in the pie and get them where you've got a real nice full pie. In fact, probably this could have even used one more small apple, but it's good enough. Okay, now the thing that we have to do before we put the top crust on is put a little bit of butter on top of this. And since I wasn't anticipating going quite this far, I'm going to have to get the butter. Just little slices of butter on here. And then I'm going to put this top crust. I'm going to add it. Since I've had my pie on top of my pie crust, let's hope it hadn't crammed it down on the counter where I can't get it off. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of all this extra on the outside. And then I'm going to take my pie crust and put it over my rolling pin again. And I really don't like those little apple cutouts to come out and stay out. So if they fall out, I'll add them back to the top of the pie. And we're just going to place this right on the top. And it will, if you work it back gently, it'll sit right in there so that that doesn't have to go into the crimp. And then I like to brush the top of the pie crust with a little bit of milk, not butter, because that will burn when it's in the oven. It'll brown before the pie does. You want to get this pie crust down below the crimping so that it doesn't over brown. But if it starts to over brown, I have a nice handy dandy little metal rim that I thought I had sitting out here, but I guess I don't. That I put around the rim of the pie if it over browns. But I'm going to set these back in here, and then I'm going to put, I won't do that on the video, but I'm going to put some sugar after I put the milk on there, and then put it in the oven. So there you have it. There's the pie pre-oven. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye.